Hey troops, this is Bob from The Truth for You to See. And while I was being a ski chaplain at Sierra Tahoe, this young man came up and joined us to worship God at 2 o'clock. And afterwards, him and I hooked up and did a few runs. And I had him tell us his story. And I was surprised to find out that I actually probably filmed him as a young skiing athlete at some of the events at Sierra Tahoe. This is his story. And note what's kind of cool is the random people who approached him to tell him about Jesus. And through a crazy experience, God called him out, and he's now a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ. This is Ney and his story. How did you come to know the Lord Jesus Christ?
Oh man, I mean, it was a slow process, and it really started with a mushroom trip. Actually.
Wow.
Yep.
Did that.
So I was born and raised an atheist, and I got turned on to the idea of just a greater God in Santa Cruz. And there's a lot of kind of weird new agey ideas in Santa Cruz rolling around, and a lot of books were kind of showing up in my path that multiple times I would have friends say, oh, you should read this book, and then the next day someone would hand it to me and things like that. So my mind was really just getting twisted away from this atheist, materialist mindset and turned on to the idea of a higher power. But that is easier to swallow for an atheist than a man on a cross.
Sure.
So the rest of it was a slow process really coming to Christianity proper, and one of the biggest key pieces in that was this mushroom trip. And so before the mushroom trip, Jesus just kept showing up in my mind, in my classes. Homeless people would be telling me about Jesus. People in the woods would be telling me about Jesus. Like, I could tell he just was very much presenting himself to me, it felt like. And so one time it was Christmas Eve, and I had never read anything in the Bible, probably a little bit here and there, but I'd never really read it myself. I think it was Luke, but I read one of the Gospels straight through, barely understood it, but was very touched, and then decided to do a whole bunch of mushrooms. So I do this big old mushroom dose alone, and just ended up in the pits, just was having full-on visions of demons attacking me, and was absolutely terrified, but this kind of terror that I wasn't afraid of death. I felt like I was going to go to hell forever. I felt very much like that these demons were my chosen companions in the afterlife, that I was viewing something eternal, and that my soul was truly evil. And it was just like a terrible feeling. I didn't know what to do about it. And it took, surprisingly, even that night, it took a while to remember that I had just read, I will forgive anyone who comes to me. And I was like, oh man, that just clicked. All of a sudden, it was real. Like, everything before that was kind of this mythology, like, oh, that sounds interesting, Jesus and God, but it hadn't quite set into my heart yet. And that night, it was like, oh shit, that is so real. That is real. I need that. And I just remember I had been kind of trying to avoid these visions because they were so terrifying, but as soon as I recognized that this cross was a real truth, I just let the demons come in. I just knelt down and just let the vision. I was like, man, if I deserve hell, I deserve hell. But there was a sense of submission to it at that point, where I was like much more calm about witnessing the horror of it instead of trying to run away. And as soon as I calmly was able to submit and ask for forgiveness very, very truly, and not just kind of like, trying to like test the Lord or something, like, just to really believe, like, I need forgiveness, will you forgive me?
Some sincerity.
Exactly.
Sincerity, okay.
As soon as that came out of my heart, the vision completely changed. These demons were coming inward at first. That was the first part of the vision for hours, and all of a sudden, these crosses were radiating outward, and I literally saw these demons fly off into this abyss way far away. And all these crosses were flying through me, and this liquid light was pouring through the top of my head, and I felt such a presence of Jesus. It was just in my mind. But it was all, I was way too high on mushrooms. The whole thing wasn't really, I was just so out of like reality that
Sure.
it was helpful, but obviously later things is what really helped me understand Jesus. But that first experience was what made me like, oh, I just remember waking up Christmas Day just kind of trembling like, oh shit, God's real, he knows everything I've done.
Wow.
Like this cross is a real thing. I didn't know how to accept it even though I did the night before. Like I was just like broken for a long time. And it took me years to slowly sift through a bunch of information and really learn and make sense of the Bible for myself. And it's a process that's obviously still ongoing.
Sure.